Everybody, it's Romania Black, and sat down this evening, got off work, and decided to watch March Comes In Like a Lion, episode 13. The show hasn't missed yet, by the way. It's been getting better and better and better each episode, and I decided to get my giant, the biggest coffee cup I own, and been like, there's like 6 cups of coffee in this thing, and I'm like, I too, like Ray, am going to help him declare war upon the forces that would oppose him. Mainly Gotou, because Gotou, he's a piece of work. He's very intriguing. I'm going to be curious to know more about him. The first impression that we got of him is that he's kind of like a Yakuza. He's terrifying, and he's kind of a slimy asshole. And I know that some people are probably going to be like, well, but Kyoko, you know, she has some agency in this too, in like hitting on him and pursuing him. Yeah, there's a problem with that, but it's kind of one of those scenarios where when it's the older person, and yeah, it is true the younger person hitting on him is wrong. She should take some ownership of that. But he's also, at least in his 40s, if not his 50s, I think in his 50s, he's an adult. He knows better. And he's married. So that makes it even worse. It's like, if you don't like your wife, divorce her. But if you're married to her, what an asshole. Cheating on her and having an affair with a teenage kid? Problems. And if Kyoko's lying about the whole thing, that's another thing. But I don't think she's lying, because she has his watch, and it's a thing. But both parties are slimy. I don't like either of them, but I especially don't like him, because he's an adult. He should know better. And for him to flaunt that in front of Ray's face when he beat the kid up for trying to defend his sister, like, I was like, out you go. I'm like, pick you up, put you in the dumpster, bye. And I don't know. It'll depend on what the show chooses to do with him. He definitely is framed as an antagonistic character for Ray. I want Ray to kick his ass so bad. But in order for that to happen, Smith has to lose to him in a match. I think Smith is going to lose, and I think Ray is going to beat Shimada. I think that is the person he's facing this episode. And it's going to be Gotou versus Ray. Right? But maybe not. Maybe Smith beats him, and it's Ray versus Smith. That'd be kind of anticlimactic. Or maybe Ray won't beat Shimada, and then it won't be climactic at all. I don't know. I want... Ray has been doing so much so far as a character to grow and to get such self-confidence and to realize himself and come into his own the last few episodes. And I think that facing Gotou and beating him would be like a big notch in his cap. Now, it may come down to Ray versus Gotou, and Ray may lose. And that may be, Gotou may be like, you got a long way to go, little boy, before you meet up with me. And that might be, you know, because we're only 13 episodes in the season. We've got plenty to go. He may lose that match against Gotou, but I want Ray to give it a fighting shot, is what I want to happen. And we'll have to see if we get there. So I do have a comment from Tater Salad, 666, that talks about how Ray, basically going back to episode 9, and that phrase where Ray didn't want to admit that he wanted to hear Kyoko's words. And I was like, that phrase is such an interesting thing. And I like the way that Tater Salad, which handles amazing, I like the way that they phrased it. It's talking about how Ray doesn't want to admit that he hates himself for wanting to feel guilty. And the thing about that is Ray is a very empathetic character. And we've seen that throughout this show, where he feels empathetic towards Issa and his grandpa or his relative that didn't get to see him play in the tournament. He feels sorry for the old man. He feels sorry for the other. He is very empathetic and compassionate and caring. And for Ray in episode 9 to episode 10, finally coming into that moment of realizing I can be empathetic and I can want the best for people, but that is not a reason for them to walk all over me. That is not a reason for them to get their way just because they are sympathetic. And I love that realization in episode 10 where Ray's like, no, I'm going to stop getting trampled on just because I'm a nice person. I'm going to stand up for myself, be a nice person, but also win. And I'm like, yes, I'm all for that. I think that's amazing. So yeah, I thought that was a good comment to make. I was really pleased with that, but I'm super excited to see what all we get in this episode. I hope you all are as well. But we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive right in and see what we get with episode 13 of March Comes In Like a Lion. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Oh, buddy. Okay. Well, we were going to get the end of Ray's match with Shimada this episode, but so let's talk about some things up on the board here, right? So let's talk about old Shimada. So Shimada, we're going to put him up here and kind of talk a little bit about him. And I'm actually going to grab a better marker than that one. That might work out a little better. Let me find one. We'll go with pink. Pink works. Yep. So let's get back on here. So Shimada, we're going to put them back up here. Maybe this is a little easier to read. Kind of. Yeah. And so we're going to put Nikaido over here. I'm so glad to see Nikaido. Glad that he's okay, I guess. He seems like he's been sick lately, so that's no good. This episode was interesting. This episode was very much... It was very atmospheric, which I love about March Comes In Like a Lion. It's very atmospheric. It, like, sets the tone for everything. It sets the tone of the mood. It very much felt like the brewing storm. It didn't feel like a calm before a storm. It felt instead like when a storm is gathering and when it's brewing and there's this tension in the air and you just know that it's going to storm that day. And it's like when it's in the middle of summer and it's really humid and hot and you can just feel it in the air. You're like, there's a storm coming. That's what this episode felt like. It felt like it was just bracing for the storm. And then it broke during Smith and Gotou's match, and then now the stage is setting once again for Ray. So I'm glad we got Ray getting out of his funk a little bit there at the end, but that doesn't mean this is going to be easy, and so we're going to have to figure out. He figured out what Shimada was doing right at the end there, and now it's like, okay, well, what does he do now? Because now he's been put into a corner. What ends up happening? So let's go through this episode. There was a lot of recap in this episode, which is unusual for March Comes In Like a Lion, but I feel like they deliberately wanted to end at a certain spot because I feel like next episode they deliberately want to end at a spot too. So we'll just have to see. But that opening before the OP, it gets me every time, and it's so good. I love just Ray's declaration of war as he like goes home on the bridge and how like turbulent and like terrifying it is. It's so freaking good. But yes, then we have the OP, which is what it is. Then we have the scene of Smith's breakfast eating, which is that scene. It starts right at, what time does it start? That's a long scene. The scene of Smith's breakfast. I love that this chapter set is called Black River, and describing Gotou as the Black River that you just kind of sink into. Yeah, that part is very fitting for him. We'll talk about Gotou here in a little bit. But yeah, the opening scene of Smith getting up in the morning starts at 4 minutes and it ends like at 6:30. So it's like a 2.5 minute scene of him eating breakfast, which, you know what? I actually am okay with it because it's not only so really quirky and fun, but the fluidity and the weird like newsprint masking that they did with the newspaper that feels very Shaft. I'm watching Magica Madoka right now. It feels like something they would do in that series. And just the idea of getting to see how other people prep for shogi matches, I think is really cool to see. Like, to see, I would love to see Nikaido's process. For some reason, I feel like Nikaido is like, have you ever watched Parks and Recreation, where there's the character Jerry, and he has a gorgeous wife, and they have 3 perfect daughters, and they're all sitting, like, singing a breakfast song while they eat breakfast. They're like, eggs, bacon, and toast, and just singing this perfect little humming melody. I imagine that's Nikaido getting ready for a shogi match. Like, everything's perfect. Everything's explained by cats. It's cutesy. It's fun. There were no cat explanations in this episode. It was not cutesy and fun. It was like hardcore war, basically. But we see Smith going over in his mind all the different playbooks for the shogi match, and I love the idea of, I like the transition from the pages of the shogi practice books, like going, and then you look over, he's a fan man, and it's like the fan blade spinning instead. That was really, really well done. I liked that. And then him getting up. Did he get up in his shirt and pants, like, ready to go to get in his suit? I'm like, what? I also like that he has he gets up there, puts his glasses on, takes his eye mask off. I like that he has, like, a little basket, a globe, a ship. That's really cool. It's very nautical. A nautical bedroom, a little cuckoo clock. He, like, gets up there. The fluidity of this scene was really well done. It almost feels like Shaft was just like, let's just show off for 2.5 minutes with the animation we have time to kill because we need to stop this at a certain point. The only part that I thought was weird was that he rummages around in the refrigerator for like an unreasonable amount of time and we don't get to see what he's doing. It's just off screen and it's like you want the camera to scroll down and see what he's getting out and we don't get to see that. It's like, what? But then yeah, him sitting down and he has like the milk, the tomato. My mother eats tomatoes like that where she just like chomps them like an apple. And he salts it, no. But then he also has like a little rotary phone, which is really super cute. Everything in his room also has like a teal or aquamarine color. It's very color coordinated, which I'm all for. It looks like he's also eating tofu. I'm assuming that's what the block of what he's eating. He looks at the paper. He like uses the paper as a bib. And then we see him like at the shogi board, but everything has this like jazz feel to it, which I just like the contrast of his preparation for a shogi match versus Ray. Ray's is so calm, like the still of the water, like calm, collected, methodical. And Smith's is almost a little bit more erratic, but it just shows that everybody kind of preps in different ways, right? And him just figuring out how he does things versus how others do theirs. And then he has his jacket, and then he goes, so he had the suit on, the coat just hides it. Interesting. He's like, I spotted Kiriyama at the Shogi Hall just once. I love animation. Usually it's from the 80s and 90s, but I love it here where it shows like the inside of an office and it's just a mess. It's just papers and boxes and files and it's all disorganized. There's like a tissue box there. There's a clothes hanger. It's just all so messy. It feels very like everything about late 80s, early 90s animation, especially in like corporate office settings, feels like this. It almost feels kind of claustrophobic. Whereas now a lot of animation, it's very like clean and clinical and organized. I'm like, no, this is like a 90s office. Nothing's digital yet. Everything's out on paper. It's absolutely just filthy and grungy and I love it. It looks so good. But he talks about seeing Ray making copies and thinking that he looked too stern to get his attention. And I liked Smith's little gaze where he's like, I was going to talk to him, but he seemed really stern in that moment, like he was in the zone. And he'd been gathering game records for Shimada and Gotou. And I feel Smith's like, damn, kid, that's brutal. Like, you didn't get any of my records to look at. How dare you? You don't think I'm going to win. But he doesn't even think he's going to win. He can't visualize a victory over Gotou. And I think that says a lot where you talk about visualization. In shogi, you have to be able to visualize beating your opponent. And if you can't visualize it, then it's not going to materialize. But I liked what Smith said there where he's like, we're professionals. Just because you can't visualize a victory doesn't mean you can run away from a match. He's like, you still have to do it. So you got to try your best to figure out what you're going to do. I was going to talk about it in the reaction, and I couldn't find a spot to talk about it, but I think that shogi is so fascinating because, especially in the professional world, because what you do is you have records of matches, and you also have, like, what we do with post-game discussion, because they go through after the match is over and they talk about what decisions they made and what they thought you could have done different and what you thought you could have done different and so on and so forth. And so I think that there's something really cool with that because, one, you get to kind of evaluate your opponent and see what to do. But the idea that you get to go through all of the matches and see the records of what they did, it would be very interesting being a professional shogi player in that regard, because if you're someone that relies on a certain strategy over and over again, then your opponents are going to figure what that strategy is and they're going to beat you by countering it. So as a professional shogi player, you have to constantly not necessarily reinvent yourself, but you have to constantly evolve as a player, change up your strategy. And even if you're an offensive player or a defensive player, you have to find different ways to do it to where you're not predictable. And so that's kind of intriguing that people can study you. And if your opponent, and you can kind of, I feel like some people would use that to their advantage. If they know going into a tournament like this, that this is what they're known for, and people are going to be studying those records, then I would want to do something completely different. I'd be like, oh, well, this is what you're expecting. Now I'm going to do this, and you weren't expecting it. But easier said than done. You can't just change the way you play, out of nowhere. That would take practice and time. So being a professional shogi player is going to involve a lot of self-growth, a lot of evolution, and a lot of constant reinvention. And that's something that never stops. So it's interesting, right? The whole Dawn system, I know it from Sarune. In that system, there's kind of like with that archery anime, it's so good. But in it kind of has like a March comes in like a lion atmosphere as well. Only it's Kiwani, so it's a totally different studio. But it has like the idea of constantly changing and evolving and getting better, right? But not to this extent. I think this is a little bit more than that. Interesting is like, what a little punk. Pisses me off. What a jerk. Ignoring the possibility that I could win. He's like, but I can't even see it. I like that we follow Smith on his journey to the match with Gotou, and we get inside of his brain and see what he's thinking. I measure my own ability with cruel precision. I love the atmosphere. And I know some people are probably going to comment. There's going to be like, is nobody on the streets? Everything's so quiet in the city. There's nobody out and about. But I feel like that's all very intentional. It's all done intentionally by Shaft, where we're supposed to be inside the head of Smith in this moment. So as we're following Smith to his match, no one else matters. All that matters is Smith on screen and us hearing his thoughts. So I think that part's really interesting. I like that. I like that a lot. He's like, there's some people who think I may win, and then there is the possibility that they will win. So there's definitely like a correlation. He's like, I don't have it. A vision of me being Gotou and then facing off against Mr. Shimada. So that's interesting. He doesn't think that Ray is going to beat Shimada. So it's like the whole time he's talking, he never says, I don't have a vision of me beating Gotou and facing Ray, or me beating Gotou and facing Shimada. He never mentions the possibility of Ray winning. So that's interesting too in its own right. But then he gets there, trudging against victory, and he talks about Gotou using the forms of Static Rock and Baron the Castle. And he's like, Gotou is heavy and stiff, which sounds like a sexual innuendo, if I've ever heard one. And Smith is very light in comparison. That's all I'll say. The moment that he sees the shadow and Smith looks up, I'm going to get a picture of this. The moment that Smith looks up, and it's just this absolutely dominating shadow of a man towering over him, like talking about Gotou being a manly man. Look, he makes the comment, and I'm sure everybody now is like, you spoilers. You're like, well, I think that he's in his 40s. I'm like, you knew going into this that he was 41 because the episode says it. Don't act like you didn't know. Like you're trying to pass it off like you didn't. But I don't know. I'm just saying. I know a lot of people in their 40s, they don't look that old. I don't know who you all know, but the people I know in their 40s are pretty good looking, and they don't look like that. He looks like he's my dad's age, and my dad's like in his late 50s. So, yeah. I think sometimes anime, the distinction, 40s to 50s is a very hard line, because I feel like people either age hard when they hit that 40 line, it's like downhill instantly, or they gracefully glide into their late 40s, into their 50s, and then they start to age. But he crashed hard. If he's 41, if he's only 4 years older than me, girl, he crashed hard. I mean, he's got that manliness going, but them wrinkles around his eyes, girl, you get some moisturizer for that. He looks so much older with the gray hair. Maybe that's it. Maybe the gray hair makes him look older. Because the one guy, Shimada, now if you told me Shimada was in his 40s, yeah, I'd believe that, because he has like the very sunken in face, but his hair is like brown and everything. He's not let it go gray, which I can't say anything. I know I have gray hair now. I've had gray hair since I was 21, so I just dye it so y'all don't see it. So anyway, the piano music that plays during this matchup, I want to be like, like I said in the reaction, I want there to be a piano player out to the side playing during the shogi match to give it that atmosphere. This match between Gotou and Smith was intense. And it was just Gotou and Smith. Like if we get to Gotou and Ray, it's gonna be like the shutters are gonna be flying off of the doors. There's gonna be like lightning and thunder and like a mild tornado warning outside. Like it's gonna be insane. I'm not ready for it. Because yeah, even Smith, I did not think he was going to win this match at all. And they still managed to make this so dramatic. Like the way that Gotou like puts the piece down and hesitates and like leans into your space. He gets into your space almost. He like gets in your space and then he pulls back and it's like, But yeah, he's like, this is the second time playing against Gotou. He's like, last time I prepared for this drawn out defensive battle, but in my nimbleness, it was weakened by the armor I wasn't used to and resulted in a crushing defeat. And he kind of does the same thing here. Gotou tells me, he's like, you know, you're supposed to be this type of player, but you let your guard down and you didn't have faith in yourself when you faced me and you tried to do something that wasn't you and it backfired. Oh, I loved the saxophone in this episode. I loved the tension. And he's like, I keep trying to like cut him with this small blade, but it's not working. It's not beating him. And then he comes at me with this massive strike. I can't slip up or I'm going to lose. And then he makes a decision and it's the one move that like wrecks him. And that's when the rain starts coming in. I love it's just the two of them left and it's dark and storming outside. The atmosphere of this series is so freaking good. I love it so much. But in this episode especially, just the sound of the rain. And this series knows when to use silence and when to use sound. And it does that so expertly that it's almost like ASMR. You could just sit there and like, you could listen to the rain, you could listen to the snow, the transition of snow to rain, and it's just so good. And he's like, how much vitality does he have? I keep wounding him, but he won't crumble. And my moves aren't getting very far right now. The thing about Ray is focused on the match with Gotou, that he's not in the present with Shimada, and Shimada finally he draws out of it and gets back into reality when he realizes that Shimada's setting him up. But in that moment, Gotou in the game with Smith like manages to just completely corner him. He's like, what is he doing? And then by the time he figures it out, it's like he's sunk into this black river and got dragged down and there's nothing he can do. Interestingly, it seems like Shimada and Gotou kind of run on the same wavelength. Similarly, I would say that with Gotou, I'm going to rewrite his name on here. I'll give him that benefit. With Gotou, he very much has a massive depth to his playing. And there's all of this pressure. He's kind of actually the opposite of Shimada, because Shimada is very non-noticeable. He basically is so bland seemingly that he lures you to defend and traps you unaware. Whereas, like, both of them are similar in the fact that if you aren't paying attention the entire time and you don't realize what they're doing, it'll be too late. That's how they're similar, is that they both are very strategic in a way that you don't see it coming. And by the time you do see it coming, it hits you like a Mack truck and you're like, oh, shoot. Whereas Gotou just has this pressure upon pressure upon pressure and you can't slip up. Shimada sneaks in like a dang ninja, and if you're not paying attention, he's going to cut you and you're not even going to notice it. That's how they're different, right? And Ray figured it out before it was a fatal mistake. And that's when he's like, okay, all right, you figured it out. Good job. Now, here's my thing about Gotou. When he finishes the match and they're doing like the little post-game discussion where they talk about like how your moves were that made you win or lose, he's pretty respectful to Smith. He's respectful of Smith. He's like, here's what you should have done. If you did this, you would have beat me. He's like, you weren't light like you normally are, and that's what caused it. And he gives him like this little pep talk where he's like, don't hesitate. Don't hesitate when you're up next to me. go for it. And I feel like that's going to be the air that he has with Ray, is like, if you hesitate, then you're off, right? But he's really respectful towards Smith, and he approaches him like he's a professional, like they're both adults. And I think that's the situation. They're both adults. I don't think Gotou respects Ray at all. I don't think Gotou respects Ray. I think that he's been doted upon by Kota in his mind, and he's just this little child prodigy that needs to be put in his place. I feel like he doesn't respect Ray. I feel like he just, because he taunts him. He taunted him with the whole conversation with Kyoko from the last episode did not need to happen. He could have just seen Ray. They both know that they've had a tussle with one another, so there's not good juju there. He could have just been like, hi, and moved on with his life. But he took that moment in time to tease a 17-year-old boy about something that was clearly very personal to him, and just aired it out there like dirty laundry. Like, not any of his business to do so. So he definitely has a different sort of reaction around Ray than he does with Smith. Now, I like the idea that Smith is like, he has his coffee can and he's like, well, a full course, huh? He's like, what's the deal with all that heavy manliness? And he's like, will I be able to project that kind of... And then when the moment where he says, what kind of... Well, how old is he? 41? The moment that he like... Now, again, this is just Smith projecting his age, where he's just like, how old is he? Am I going to be able to project that kind of punch in 10 years? So Smith is 31. I'm like, Smith, you're a man too. Don't let him say that. He's like, I bet he's popular with the ladies. Well, depends on the type of lady. Probably. He would not be my type at all. I'd be like, get the F away. Bye. Yeah, no. And he's like, okay, for the rest of the night, I like this. I like that Smith is like, if course A, if it goes in the trash can, I drink my cares away at the local pub. Course B, if I miss, I go home, get under the covers, and sob. And instead, because Smith is a nice guy, and he goes after the can that missed, he sees the little cat. The little cat that is trembling with its beautiful blue eyes. If I saw a black kitten with big blue eyes like that, he's like, oh my God. Or perhaps the course C, where I bring a stray cat home and I take care of it. I love that he took the cat home. It's so cute. He's like, all right. And then he puts it inside his coat. He's like, let's start from square one. Oh, I love it. So meanwhile, again, I feel like part of this recap is because we want to end at a certain point. This chapter being called Beyond the Door. So he looks at Shimada's records and doesn't really find any opening with him. And he's like, I don't exactly know how to beat this guy because he doesn't really stand out. There's not any distinctive features. And I think that's intentional. Again, you either keep evolving or conversely, I feel like there's two ways you could go about it. You either have a distinct style and you're constantly having to reinvigorate, reinvent, revitalize it in different ways to keep people on their toes. Or, like Shimada seemingly, you don't have a distinct style at all. You just play the game. It almost seemed for a moment like he was copying Ray and just was doing whatever Ray was doing or just reacting to whatever Ray was doing. And it's like, okay, well, if you do that, I'm going to do this. And not have a distinctive way to do it. But it almost seemed like Shimada was molding himself to whatever the opponent was doing. Because that's where he said he doesn't play to win, he plays to not lose. Which is interesting because that's kind of a defensive strategy. But it almost seemed like he was molding to the opponent. What's interesting with that is you have this idea with Gotou of no hesitation. And you just go in full force. I don't think that this involves hesitation either. I think it's a strategic move. I think it's literally like, I'm going to go in there and whatever my opponent does, I'm just going to respond to it. And then eventually back him up into a corner. And go from there. So again, we see Ray's mission as he goes to the Shogi Hall. What I find interesting is that we both see Smith and Ray walk to their respective matches. With Smith, there's some jazz music. It's quiet. It's peaceful. He's like, I'm on my way. Proclaimers are like playing in the distance. With Ray, it's like a storm. In broad daylight. In broad damn daylight. And then he's like, I remember he was a guest speaker in grade school. He was thin and tall and he spoke quietly. and I had had a winning streak, so I just watched from afar. And it's almost as if what Ray is insinuating there is that I didn't take him seriously because he didn't stand out. He didn't seem like a very, big personality, and I had just been winning a lot. So it almost seems like Ray is kind of noting, yeah, I was kind of maybe full of myself back then, and I should have been paying attention, and I wasn't, and he didn't stand out. There's a character in Heaven Official's Blessing who Shimada reminds me of, and if I say his name, it'll be a spoiler, so I'm not going to do that. But if you read Heaven Official's Blessing, there is a character who doesn't stand out. He's very bland, and Shimada reminds me of him quite a bit. He didn't make an impression on me. And he's like, matches against people like that are usually drawn out battles. He's like, it's not my favorite. Ray's like, because Ray maybe overthinks a little bit. So he's like, I don't want to get to the point where it's a drawn out battle and I overthink. I want to just like get into it. He's like, I can't get irritated. That's where he'll eat me alive. And that's kind of the thing that I love about this episode. And I want Ray to be present in the moment because I think he's too worried about what's to come. He's too worried about Gotou and what's in the future. And you cannot do that. And it's so hard to tell someone that because I coach public speaking. We have a public speaking team where I work. And I coach a team. And when we go to nationals, especially in a tournament setting, the students, you can tell, because I was a competitor once too, it happens. You get to a national tournament, and what do you start doing? You envision yourself in the final round. And when you get lost trying to anticipate what's to come, you aren't present in the moment, and you mess up. Or you aren't delivering a convincing message. You're not speaking to the best of your ability because you're off somewhere else. You have to be mindful of where you are at the moment, what you're doing, who your audience is, who you're up against, and that stuff in the future comes later. Like, what you do now will produce the products for later, but if you focus on the future, you will never make it there. And we try to tell students that, but it's so easy to get caught up like Ray is in thinking of that next match and not staying calm. And it doesn't help that he keeps thinking of Kyoko, and it's like, don't worry about her, worry about the guy in front of you. So at first we don't see him, and then they start doing this little match against one another, and it just seems like everything's by the book and nothing crazy's happening. He's like, I went first, which means he sets the stage and the guy follows him. He's like, it's time to battle. And it's just like, it just seems like he's matching his moves as it goes. And he's like, is he trying to block everything? I like Ray's kind of like focused look where he's kind of confused on what to do. And he's like, well, this seems kind of easy, so I guess I'll do this. And I like that he's just sitting there, this tall, thin man, slowly making his moves. And he's like, somehow it's harder for me to move. And he's like, at a time like this, it's a good idea to surround the king. And then he's like, wait a minute. Why am I surrounding the king? Why am I defending? I'm supposed to be attacking. I love that shot of him in the black and white when he's like, wait a minute. He's like, what are we doing? I love that shot. That's such a good shot. I want to get a picture of it if I can real quick. Yeah. It's probably going to be the thumbnail, that black and white image of him. And then everything starts to get murky. He's like, somewhere along the way, I started defending. When did the situation get like this? I didn't make any mistakes, so how did he lead me here? And then at that moment, he sees, he's like, can I not attack anymore? And that's when he sees him put down the knight to the gold general. And then everything shatters. I love it shatters, and he gets snapped back into reality in that moment. That idea of splitting his head open. And then I love the guy looks at him like, you finally look this way and see me. It's like seeing him for the first time. Like Ray realizes who his opponent is in that moment. Ah, that's so good. So good. Like, yes. It's weird that he's mildly attractive. I don't know. I don't like his hair. No, maybe I don't know. Why do I think he's mildly attractive and not Gotou? I think it's the personality. I'm not into machismo guys that are just like flaunting how manly man they are. That doesn't do me anything. I'm like, get out. Anyway, so the Shogi Hall though, I'm assuming this is from the past, right? Because he's like, oh, big brother. Oh, and I'm like, just, there's Nikaido looking as adorable as possible. Like, he's just sitting there like, hi, don't mind me, the biggest ray of sunshine in the world. And then I love the fashion that he has. And this has to be in the past. Because he's like, what did you come here for, kiddo? He's like, you don't have a match today. I like that you have him, like, shaking, that you have Shimada shaking, and then you have Nikaido like, oh, well, sorry, big brother. And he's like, how's your fever? He's like, you still have one. So he's been sick. He's like, you need to take care. Your promotion is on the line. You promised that you wouldn't overdo it to both your teacher and to me. So I'm curious who Nikaido's teacher is now, because why would you bring that up if we weren't going to meet who his teacher is? So who is Nikaido's teacher? Is it the white-haired man? If it's the white-haired man, I'd be like, okay, we're done. Of course, Nikaido's family has money, has to be taught by the best, but I don't think Shimada and Nikaido are biological brothers. I feel like maybe they're just like, you know, brothers taught by the same teacher. But maybe they're biological brothers. Maybe they're half-brothers. Maybe they're half-brothers and his mom, like, kept her name or something like that. I don't know. And he's like, fine, I'll head home and lie down. Sorry. And then he's like, why are you here? Is there something you want to tell me? And he's like, actually, yes. Split Kiriyama's head in half. He's like, I want you to beat up Kiriyama. I want you to beat Rei in a match. Do it for me. And I'm like, Nikaido, you're supposed to be cheering him on. But they're rivals, so, you know. And Shimada's like, what? And then he looks up and he's like, dang it, kiddo. I was wondering what you were going to say. So he's like, at this moment... He's like, I was gonna beat him, but now he's caught on, and the game is afoot. Such a troublesome thing. And Rei's just like suddenly seeing him for the first time, realizing like, shit, I nearly lost to this guy. And he's like, well then, let's continue, shall we? Oh, I love it. Oh, so. Next episode, we'll get to know more about Shimada, maybe, and what's going on with him, if he's related to Kaido, if Rei catches on to any of this, or if it's revealed to him, what is his deal, what's going on. We'll figure that all out, I guess, next episode. I wanted to bring up the end card for episode 13. I really love it. It's Shimada with a ton of cats, which would make sense if him and Nikaido are related. Maybe that's where Nikaido got inspired by... the cats representing Shogi. Are all of these, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's 7 different pieces. Maybe all of the cats that are over him represent Shogi pieces. That'd be cute. It's done by Kiyohiko Azuma, who apparently is a famous mangaka. I really like the style of this. It's super cute. This is actually one of my favorite end cards. I really like the composition of it. I like the background. It's simple, but it's cute and colorful. But it's also kind of subdued. I like it. This is one of my favorites so far. It works really well. I like it. I would make it like a background for something. But yeah, super cute. So this episode definitely felt like just an in-between episode. Like we had the setup last episode. This is getting us ready for the final match. And then I don't think next week we're going to have Rei versus Gotou. I think next week is all going to be about Shimada versus Rei to see who's going to face Gotou because. So we'll just have to see what happens. I was like, for a hot second, I was like, is Rei going to lose this? And we're not going to have a match between him and Gotou? That would be anticlimactic, but who knows? So in any case, I'm excited to hear your comments down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week with more of March Comes In Like a Lion. Bye!